When Tutankhamun's tomb was unearthed after remaining sealed for thousands of years, researchers found a dagger that was eerily still sharp. But when they tested the blade, the results revealed even stranger findings. King Tut's brief reign over 3,000 years ago left little mark on history, until the discovery of his pristine tomb in the 1920s led to an explosion of interest in the ancient Egyptian civilization. But despite his shining legacy, Tutankhamun's broken remains, exquisitely preserved, reveal the truth about his life was less than golden. Pharaoh Tutankhamun was born circa 1341 BCE during the chaotic reign of the pharaoh Akhenaten in ancient Egypt's 18th dynasty. His father is widely accepted to be Akhenaten himself, an iconoclast whose reign was so controversial and sacrilegious that later pharaohs tried to erase him from history completely. His mother, however, is more of a mystery. DNA testing has named the mummy known as the Younger Lady as King Tut's mother, though her name is lost to time. Her mummy was found in a secondary tomb near Akhenaten's resting place, known as Tomb KV35. At some point in her history, the Younger Lady mummy suffered extensive damage, likely caused by ancient tomb robbers. But how did they identify her? Well, it wasn't as hard as you would think. The same DNA testing that identified King Tut's parents also revealed that his parents were full siblings. This kind of inter-family marriage wasn't uncommon among royal families of the era, and indeed in royal families worldwide for many subsequent centuries. King Tut ascended to the throne at around 9 years old, following the successive deaths of his father and his two short-reigning successors. He might have been young, but he was still the king, and like any king, he needed a queen by his side. Following in the tradition of his family, King Tut married his half-sister, Ankhesenamun, sired by his father with another woman. King Tut eventually fathered two daughters, whose bodies were buried with him in his tomb. Tragically, neither of the king's children survived very long. The bodies discovered with him were those of babies. Historians believe one daughter didn't live long after birth. The other child's story is even more gut-wrenching. The mummified remains of King Tut's daughters were very small, one significantly so. Scientists concluded that one of the royal daughters was born prematurely, likely after only 5 to 6 months of pregnancy. A premature baby at this time had little to no hope of survival. King Tut was a short king, quite literally, thought to have stood at about 5 foot 6 inches tall with a narrow waist and rounded hips. The discovery of his skull also revealed one shocking characteristic very uncommon to the era. He had great teeth. CT scans also revealed something about him that had never been seen in any artistic depictions. He was likely born with a partial cleft palate. The fact that he never allowed this detail to be included in images of himself indicates he felt some shame about it. But ailments were just one of his problems. He also had to deal with the mess his father left behind. King Tut ascended to the throne during a turbulent era known as the Amarna period. His father Akhenaten had completely upended the kingdom by outlawing the 1,000-year-old ancient Egyptian religion and instituting his own monotheistic religion called Atonism. Akhenaten's religious reforms started to deteriorate the moment he was gone, and by the time King Tut took the throne, the situation had descended into chaos. It was too much for the young pharaoh to take on alone. Due to his young age, it's likely that King Tut's advisors enacted most of his political agenda, at least for the first few years of his reign. Many of these courtly figures had their own ambitions and ideas of what to do with the empire. One of King Tut's closest advisors was the man he appointed Lord of the Land, his general, Horemheb. Notably, unlike most of his peers, Horemheb was of peasant birth and had worked his way up the ranks of the military to attain his honoured position in the pharaoh's court. But Horemheb's responsibilities were a little more hands-on than most. King Tut had appointed him to his position to maintain law and order, but the pharaoh needed some soothing himself. The young king was known for his childish temper tantrums when he didn't get his way, and his general possessed a unique skill, the ability to calm his young liege when these tantrums flared. But there was one insidious idea King Tut's advisors wanted to put in his head more than anything else. Many in the kingdom still disapproved of Akhenaten's move away from traditional Egyptian religion, and the young king's advisors shared this view. Under their direction, King Tut began to restore the polytheistic Egyptian religion and undo his father's religious shift to Atenism. This entailed a grand reconstruction. King Tut, or most likely his advisors, undertook several large rebuilding projects, restoring temples and monuments across the kingdom. Tut also reinstated traditional cults and returned priests to their former positions of power. His father had also moved the location of the royal court from Memphis, near modern-day Cairo, to the city of Amarna, a symbolic rejection of the old ways. Though it was the capital when he was born, Tutankhamun moved the court back to Memphis, abandoning Amarna entirely. Despite bending to the will of his advisors and moving his capital back to Memphis, King Tut nonetheless appeared hesitant to abandon his father entirely. Evidence appears to suggest that he exhumed the former pharaoh's body from near Amarna and reburied it in the esteemed Valley of the Kings. But even if he had a soft spot for his dad, King Tut nevertheless continued working to undo everything Akhenaten had done. Among the many building projects King Tut initiated, perhaps one of the most well-known is the avenue of sphinxes leading to the Temple of Mut. The king endowed existing statues with elaborate new ram heads and accompanying statues of his likeness. Yet even more than the structures he built, the monuments to the young man himself reflected an even larger religious shift. While ancient Egyptians typically deified pharaohs after they died, King Tut was special. Though his reign didn't last long, he became one of the few pharaohs to be deified and worshipped as a god while he was still alive. This was likely due to his efforts in restoring the traditional religion and his favour among the priesthood. Evidence suggests King Tut's cult of worship gained near universality throughout ancient Egypt. People would come from across the land to appeal to this demigod for his forgiveness for their sins and for his favour to cure them of their ailments. And the pharaoh's benevolence stretched beyond his own people. Egypt found itself in economic turmoil following the reign of King Tut's father, and it had resulted in diplomatic neglect. The young pharaoh attempted to restore peace with neighbouring kingdoms, and the presence of various gifts from other countries in his burial tomb suggests he was successful in these endeavours. Still, young as he was, King Tut was no pushover. There wasn't a complete absence of conflict during King Tut's reign, with evidence that the boy pharaoh embarked on at least some military campaigns. Historical evidence suggests that King Tut remains one of the few undefeated kings of Egypt, perhaps suggesting a penchant for martial strategy. His prowess in battle, however, is another matter entirely. It's the subject of some debate whether King Tut ever actively participated in battle, and there's no consensus among historians. Evidence for his presence on the battlefield includes the impressive armoury found in his tomb, as well as imagery depicting the young pharaoh in battle. The strongest evidence against King Tut's battle prowess is the historical speculation that he may have had significant physical disabilities. Evidence from DNA testing has suggested that he may have suffered from bone necrosis and club foot, and the presence of an ornate cane in his burial tomb heavily implies he may have relied on it for mobility. Sadly, the young king's poor health eventually caught up with him. His reign ended prematurely only 9 years after his ascension to power. The king died at the tragically young age of 18 after presiding over an enormously transformative time in power. The cause of his death has sparked fierce debate. As there are no surviving records of the circumstances of King Tut's death, many theories have arisen. The most likely cause is a combination of factors, mainly a fractured leg evident from his remains and complications from severe malaria infection. In fact, genetic testing has revealed that the latter seems to have been a bane on the king's existence. Tests on King Tut's remains revealed several infections of the most severe strain of malaria, likely leading to significant health difficulties for the young pharaoh. In fact, the parasites found in King Tut's remains are the oldest known genetic proof of malaria, making the king part of medical history too. Regardless of the cause, the sudden demise of the young pharaoh sparked other problems. King Tut's early death was clearly unexpected. It appears the royal tomb intended for his eventual burial was incomplete at the time he died. As it was Egyptian custom to observe bodies for precisely 70 days between death and burial, the court likely had no choice but to choose an unusually small tomb when the time came. As Tut hadn't fathered any surviving daughters, let alone sons, that could carry on the patrilineal tradition, his passing marked the end of his bloodline. This succession crisis threw the kingdom into immediate instability once again, and there were several different people who had their eyes on the throne. As per Egyptian custom, King Tut's wife Ankhesenamun was to marry the new ascendant king following her husband's death. Horemheb moved to take power, but there was one thing he didn't consider. Ankhesenamun did not desire to marry a man of peasant birth like him. This left an opportunity open for another of King Tut's advisors. Amid the succession crisis, it appears King Tut's vizier, Ai, manoeuvred his way into the coveted position of pharaoh, as he at least had some royal blood. Unfortunately, no details of Ai's plot survived, but we know he was successful because art from the era depicts him presiding over King Tut's funeral, a customary duty for the successor pharaoh. But he didn't get to enjoy the fruits of his labour for long. Ai was an elderly man when he assumed King Tut's throne, and his reign was short-lived. He died not long after taking power, and again before siring an heir with Ankhesenamun. Ai had tried to name his own son, Nachtman, as heir, but it appears his son perished before having a chance to assume the throne. Historical records indicate that Horemheb finally got his wish, and he succeeded Ai as the next pharaoh after some struggle. But the struggle appears to have left him bitter. Horemheb appears to have felt scorned by his initial dismissal in the succession process. He began to usurp many of the monuments built in King Tut's honour, replacing depictions of the younger pharaoh with ones of himself. Perhaps there was some respect left for his former liege though. Horemheb bitterly defaced Ai's tomb, but left King Tut's untouched, indicating some acknowledgement of the close relationship he had with the boy. King Tut's final resting place remained relatively untouched for millennia after his burial. It was eventually buried by debris from the construction of subsequent tombs, and further obscured with the construction of workers' houses over the entrance. Unlike the tombs of most Egyptian pharaohs, King Tut's wouldn't be rediscovered by anyone for 3,000 years. In 1922, archaeologist Howard Carter was invited to excavate the Valley of Kings by colonial landowners. His large crew set to work systematically uncovering tomb after tomb, and on November 4th, they discovered one that was different from any of the rest. Varying accounts attribute the discovery to either workmen digging beneath the workers' huts, or to a local young boy digging outside the designated work area. Regardless, what they found was awe-inspiring. Most of the tombs Carter's team had uncovered up until this point were in varying states of disrepair. However, they found King Tut's tomb in a near-perfect state of preservation. It would prove to be a wellspring of historical and scientific discovery. Buried alongside King Tut was a trove of artefacts that remained in near-pristine condition. Among the 5,398 objects found in his tomb, archaeologists uncovered a coffin, a face mask, thrones, musical instruments, and an eerily sharp dagger. When scientists recently tested the metal of the blade, they determined that it came from a meteorite, but it's highly unlikely that the ancient Egyptians would have the technology to craft a weapon from meteorite debris. So the dagger either came from a more advanced civilization, or, as some perfectly sane people are convinced, it could have been left behind by aliens.
I claim this planet in the name of Mars.
The most recognisable item recovered from King Tut's tomb was his ornate funerary mask. The depiction, made of gold, turquoise and other materials, and probably inspired by the pharaoh's actual face, has become near synonymous with ancient Egyptian culture. The discovery of King Tut's tomb made headlines across the world and sparked an explosion of interest in ancient Egypt. Indeed, the now common moniker King Tut was a creation of that very media frenzy. King Tut's life was short, and as a pharaoh, his name made little impact on the culture of his time. But due to the preservation of his tomb and the publicity of its discovery, he's become more or less the figurehead of ancient Egypt in the minds of most people in the modern world. In the last century, dozens of exhibitions focusing on King Tut and his artefacts have been assembled and travelled all over the world. All of them have attracted record numbers of visitors to their host museums, and King Tut has become one of the hottest historical tickets on Earth. But the pharaoh himself generally stays put. As of 2007, King Tut's mummy has been returned to his tomb in Luxor, Egypt, where he remains on display for tourists from all over the world to visit. The pharaoh, who in life faced so much tragedy, has, in a symbolic way, gotten the reincarnation he likely dreamed of, on a scale he never could have imagined. Thanks for watching History Exposé. If you love uncovering the best stories in history, hit like and subscribe to keep exploring with us. Don't forget to visit our main page, Factinate, for more incredible facts about everything.